Hey guys, welcome back. Patrick here. Today we're going to be taking a look at the different lights that are available throughout the THREE.js library, with the exception of the area lights, because the area lights require the deferred renderer and we're not going to be using the deferred renderer today. Without further ado, let's hop right into our scene. And you can see not a whole lot is going on here because I have all of the lights deactivated at the moment. I'm also going to go ahead and open up the code. We'll take a look at that in a little bit. Alright, so the first thing we're going to need to take a look at is the ambient light. Alright, so let's go ahead and turn that one on. Alright, and you can see what we've done here with this code is we've built on all the previous works that we've done to create this kind of more complex GUI interface. Now you can see the ambient light is going to apply a universal light to our scene. It's going to be pretty much flat and apply it to every single object that's within our scene. Alright, so clearly the ambient light is the light that you're going to need to use in conjunction with another light. Let's go ahead and add a little bit of rotation onto that cube just to create a little variety. Alright, there we go. Alright, so I'm going to delete that ambient light. Going to go back in and let's take a look next at the directional light. Alright, so the directional light is in fact a what one would consider a sunlight in most circumstances. Let's go ahead and turn the helper on so we can see it a little better. Alright, so you can see this little helper right here tells us exactly what's going on with the directional light. This is called a frustum. You have a left, right, near, top, and bottom view of the frustum. The frustum could be considered a sort of a light field of view. It's everything that is contained the light information is contained with. You'll see that the shadow is only appearing in what is contained within it. So if we reduce this far on the frustum, you see that the information disappears. However, overall scene light information isn't going to disappear because this light area right here is providing us with all the lighting, general lighting for the overall scene. If we did, however, change the target of it, you'll notice that the light is going to shift ever so slightly. Alright, so let's look at the frustum some more. We can increase the far on it, as well as increase the size of the bottom, the top, the right, and the left. Maybe the top a little bit more, and the bottom a little bit more. And increase the far, and we should be able to get everything. Maybe not. There we go. Alright, so now you can see we can kind of get everything within the scene itself. Alright, and again you can adjust the intensity and it's going to impact the overall scene intensity. And you can also affect the darkness of that, the shadows, and the bias as well. Alright, and we can move the position of this as well. Alright, so that is the directional light. You'll see additionally you can affect the color of it. Alright, so let's go ahead and turn that helper off, remove the light, and we'll go on to the next one, which is going to be the hemisphere light. Alright, so let's add a hemisphere light to the scene. Alright, what is the hemisphere light doing? The hemisphere light actually is sometimes called a sky portal, but basically it's a general light that's going to create a skylight and a ground light. The ground light is going to kind of bounce up and reflect off the bottom surfaces. So let's go ahead and change the ground color to, we could do red, we could do green, and you can see how it's just kind of reflecting off the bottom, whereas the skylight is kind of reflecting off these top surfaces. So if you look at the top over here, you can see how that's impacting everything. So we could go ahead and change the sky color on that to a blue. Maybe decrease the ground intensity and create a nice equilibrium between the two. And again, this is not creating any shadows, it's just overall giving a nice ambiance to the scene. Alright, so that is the hemisphere light. Go ahead and delete that. And then we've already looked at the spotlight. Now I have applied a Phong shader to everything, whereas before we were working with a Lambert shader. And you can see how that's creating a totally different view on this scene. Let's open up our helper on the spotlight. And you can see how that is defining that actual view. And we can change all the variables within the spotlight, change the view of it. And we've kind of already gone over this one in the past, but you can see how you can get a nice narrow view. And impact the shadow darkness on that. Field of view. And change the target. Of course, the exponent is going to affect this decay right over in here. You can expand the angle on that. Increase the intensity. And you can see how this can get us really, really nice lighting. Now, if we combine a couple of these things, that's where we can really start to see how things could shine. So if we went ahead and re-added the hemisphere light to the scene, maybe decrease the intensity on the hemisphere light. And decrease the intensity on the spotlight. And then increase the intensity on the ground color. You can start to see how we can get these really cool looking lights. Maybe we change the target on this to the cube. Alright, so last but not least, we have the point light. Let's go ahead, let's remove the hemisphere. I'm going to turn off the shadow camera and delete that light as well. Let's go ahead and add the point light. Alright, this is just going to add a basic point light to the scene. And the point light is going to be a single point in space that's going to emanate a light in all directions. Okay, again, this isn't going to create shadows, but it will have a decay on it. So you can see that decay. So again, maybe you want to have a point light above your entire scene, and then maybe another light. So like maybe we would do something like this, move it over to the center of the scene, and then add in another light, for example, a spotlight. Maybe decrease the intensity of the point light. But you can see in conjunction using a couple of these different types of lights, you can really start to get some cool different lighting effects within your scene. Again, I recommend playing around with this stuff, doing some research, looking at some other softwares, how people use these lights differently in conjunction. This is a good starting ground, but let's go ahead and take a look at the code now to figure out how this all comes together. Alright. So the first thing you'll see is that we've created this array of lights over here in the variables. I've also created an ambient area directional 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. These are kind of like binary on-off switches that we're going to use to enable us to kind of turn on and turn off these different lights within the scene. I didn't want to get it this scene too complicated, and I only wanted to kind of limit you to one light per object. Otherwise, things can get kind of messy. So that way I've kind of created this on-off switch for all these different lights that enables you that ensures that you don't go overboard with the amount of lights that are in the scene. Alright, another thing I've done is I've switched all the materials to the Phong shader, as well as set all the colors with the exception of the ground plane to the same. That way when we're using things like the hemisphere light, certain materials are going to show up differently with the hemisphere light. For example, if we were using a different colored shader for the hemisphere light, for example, this ground color, if we changed it to something else, for example, this blue, you'll see that in conjunction with the green that is already in the scene, it's giving us a totally different color. If we had different colored materials on this, we would get all sorts of different colored lights because it takes everything into account when it's calculating stuff. So one thing to bear in mind is how these lights are going to affect your scene and what colors they're going to produce. And go ahead and feel free to change all this stuff around if you want to see how that stuff works. Alright, so you've seen a lot of this stuff earlier. This is just creating our general geometry for the scene. And then this is going to create an array of lights, essentially. And this is going to be our ambient, directional, point light, and spotlight. I've noticed I've left off the hemisphere light. For whatever reason, I was having trouble calling the hemisphere out of here. It worked fine when I called the hemisphere light out of the array. It didn't work once I stuck it in the array. So that's the one little outlier within this code. I didn't want to spend too much time focusing on that one little bit and figuring out why it wasn't. It was appearing in the scene when I look at it. However, it wasn't actually rendering or doing anything. So I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time knowing that it was a weird little quirk in the code and trying to figure out why it was doing that. Alright, so moving ahead, we have our controls for everything. You'll see that we have our add light function right here. That's these two buttons right here. And all it's doing is just calling the add or delete light. You also have a light selector that's set to 0. That's this one right here, 0 being the very first one, ambient light. Alright, next we have our directional light values. Okay, so let me close this up. We have our ambient light values, which is only really the one value, which is the color one. And then our directional light values, which is the next one. And these are all the potential values that you can use or affect within there. So we're just going to reference those in the GUI, followed by the hemisphere light parameters and the point light parameters that are available, as well as the spotlight parameters that are available. Alright, next we have our array of lights. These are the color options for the ambient one. And that's really the only one that's available for the ambient is the color. No intensity on that one. Alright, next we have the directional light parameters. This is where we're adding everything. So the GUI and setting all of our base stuff. So you can see this is 0 in the array, which is the ambient light. This is 1 in the array, which would be the directional light, I believe. Yep. Followed by the hemisphere, point, and spotlight. So we have the directional, followed by the point, and the spotlight. And all we're doing is just setting our initial values inside the array for all of these different things. And we're pulling all of our initial values directly from all the calls that we did initially for our GUI. So we're just going ahead and calling them directly out of there. There's a couple instances where I didn't. I just kind of wrote these in, just like the shadow map width and height. You could stick them theoretically in here, although this isn't really affected by the .GUI, so I didn't bother. And the position such as that was kind of just me being quick and dirty on putting those. You don't necessarily, you could call those directly in here as well. Okay, so we're calling all these different lights and we're setting all their initial values and we're setting them all from the .GUI, and then going on we're going to this is where we set our light selector, and this is a this is a list that we have, and it's assigned these values 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, which correspond to the array with the exception of the hemisphere light. Again, that was because I couldn't stick it in the array for whatever reason. So that basically allows us to choose which light we're using and then add it to the scene, delete it, or delete it from the same. Okay, so Again, we have our ambient light controls going on. Moving on, these are all stuck in folders. I went over that a little bit earlier, how you stick something in a folder, you call the variable name of the folder and use the .GUI add folder. Alright, so this is where we look at all the changes that can be affected in the scene. So we're adding the controls to the scene, and then the corresponding functions that go with it. So in this case, we'll look at the first one, which is ambient light. So we're creating a folder for the ambient light, and then we're adding the color function. We're calling the name of the color function, and then we're just saying on change the array of lights set is color dot set hex, and that's value, and the value is the ambient color right here. Alright, next we have the GUI controls for the directional light. And then this is, again, this one is getting a little bit more complicated. You can see there's a ton of options here. So basically these are your positional information. And this is the target. Just like the spotlight, you can only focus it on targets. So we're basically saying that if it, on one of these changes, if it equals one of these values, it changes the target to that object right in here. And it's calling it directly out of the array. So that's position 1 in the array. So similar, we have the intensity, the options, the on change, the array position going into the value that's being passed down through these changes. I'm not going to go through each one of these. However, you can see it's kind of repetitive. It does the exact same thing. Alright, and then we're just closing up that folder with the close command. Alright, next we have the Hemisphere folder, and this only has a couple different options in it. We're passing that information in for the ground color, we're passing that information for the sky color. The sky color is referred to as color.set hex, so similar to how all the other lights work, although it's referred to as sky color, you're still just setting it like it's a regular color. And then you have the intensity over here. Alright, next we have the point light. Okay, so these are all the point light controls. And we have the point light controls going on. We're just adding these, adding these values to it. We have the spotlight controls. And the point lights, again, not as complicated as some of the other ones. You really just have the position values for it and the intensity and the distance. So not a whole lot going in there in the point light. The spotlight, we've kind of looked at this one in the past, just building upon that. Again, targets, and then we have our on-change functions that change these values. So it's pretty straightforward. It's a lot of stuff, but it's nothing very complicated. Okay. And then once all that stuff changes, then you just need to update it in the array. Alright, so now we have the add light function. This is a throwback to what we were working on before, which is the add object function. It functions the same way. The only thing is that what we're doing is we're calling the array light object, and then we're referencing it by the GUI Controls.light selector. So whichever one it is on right there, it's going to remove that from the scene. Okay, and then here's our on-off switch right here, which basically sets that ambient value to 1. So that basically limits it to only calling it once, because essentially it's saying that if the ambient value is equal to 0 and the light switcher is equal to 0, light selector being the 0 is the light selecting option up here, then you can call the add function to it. And after you've done that, it changes that value to 1. That way you can't call it a second time. Okay. So basically same thing down here. The only difference is that there's a point light helper on this one, and that's just so that you can see where this point light is. So we're just adding that to the scene as well. It's the only way we can kind of see where this position is on that. Alright, and then we have the hemisphere light, and this is being called a little bit differently. We're actually just physically calling a new hemisphere light. The reason being, again, was we couldn't stick it in an array for whatever reason. So we're just calling that down here. Now we could have done the same thing with all of these lights. I was just trying to keep things a little bit more neat and orderly by calling them out of an array. Alright, delete function, this is basically going to do the exact opposite of the add function. However, it's going to change the value back to 0. So that's kind of that quick little binary operation. Okay. One thing to remember is that in order for you to kind of change all this information on the fly, you need to set all your materials to needs updates. Otherwise, what happens is that nothing changes whatsoever. So make sure that in your render function, if you're playing around with this, that you add that. Okay. And again, those are your positional controls that are located in the render function. Aside from that, that kind of builds on everything. The big thing to get out of this is what all the lights do and how they can be used in your scene. So I hope you guys found this very helpful. And thanks again for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.